Many of us have inherited images of God that feel more like an angry warden than a loving father. We've heard the sermons that use fear as a primary motivator, and we've seen how that kind of theology can eventually leave us feeling more anxious than anchored. But is that the only way to see it? Today, we're putting some of history's most famous and most infamous thoughts about the afterlife to the test. We're reacting to these quotes in real time, blind, without knowing what the others have brought to the table. Some of these ideas are going to feel like a gut punch. Others might feel like a breath of fresh air. We're sorting through the concepts that are difficult to reconcile, the ones that are compelling, and the ones that finally feel like they're grounded in the person of Jesus. This is the finale of our Hell series. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Easy Approach.
Take it easy. Take it easy.
All right, everybody, welcome in to the Easy Approach. As always, I am Nate, and as always, I'm joined by my good buddy, Tony Zuma.
Yes, sir. And today we're continuing our topic or conversation on the mysterious understandings of hell, which is always a favorite one for everyone, right?
That's right. We've been joined over the last couple episodes, as we've discussed hell together, by also good buddy, Michael Schlender. And Michael is joining us again today.
I'm back.
He's back. You thought he was dead, but he's only just beginning. It's Michael 3.
The third.
Yep. So this is, in theory, this is the finale of our Hell series. We've been going through this big discussion about one of the most controversial things that you can bring up in the church today. What is hell exactly? There's a lot of cultural baggage that comes with it, as we've discussed, fellas. There's a lot of misconceptions that comes with it. Last episode we took a look at some of the views throughout history that the church has held about the afterlife and hell, and we also looked at some of the Greek and Hebrew words that are translated hell in the Bible, and we kind of, we wanted to fit the whole thing into one episode, like all of it, just have one hell episode.
Very wishful thinking.
That's right. In the same way that we wanted to do one episode on the end times, and we want to do one episode on the book of Job, but
I'm
a
noticing trend.
That's right. All of them evolved into like 3-episode mini series, and this one has as well. Knock on wood that it stays 3 episodes. Like it could evolve. Who knows? But in theory, this is our final episode, and it came as a result of us having a handful of quotes, kind of each of us, that we wanted to share from writers or thinkers, theologians, or church fathers throughout history that we find very compelling in one direction or another. And then we just ran out of time and couldn't talk about them.
Yeah.
So today, ladies and gentlemen, welcoming all of you back. If you have not listened to the first 2 episodes, I highly recommend you go check those out right now. But welcoming all of you back, and today, here's how I'll put it. We brought receipts. We scoured history. We scoured theology. We scoured pop culture for quotes about hell. And at least the ones I have, some are terrifying, some are beautiful, but here's the catch to this entire thing. We haven't shown them to each other.
That's right.
We're going to be reacting blind. We're going to be reacting blind to each of the quotes each of us has brought. And here's the basic format. When one of us presents a quote and kind of explains our thoughts on it, the other 2 are going to react to it. And the reaction needs to be kind of aimed at putting that quote in one of 3 different categories. Category 1 is what I'll call yikes. It's the yikes category, or the disorientation category. This is the category when you hear that and you cringe on the inside, or you think this is a theological picture that is like I find it messed up. That's that first category. The second category is the let's call it the compelling category. This is the kind of quote that hits you and you say, All right. There's definitely truth there, but it's not a complete package. It's not an orthodox package exactly, but it's compelling. I can't just say I agree with that wholesale, but it's compelling me. And I should probably think a lot more about that. That's category number 2. So category number 1 is yikes. Category number 2 is compelling. And the final category, we'll call it grounding. Grounding in Jesus. This is hopeful, grounding, and Jesus-centric. This is the quote that you say, all right, any conversation about hell needs this. Like, I hear that and I take a deep breath in the middle of this conversation. Make sense, fellas?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to make one spur of the moment change. Instead of when you read the quote, explaining your individual thoughts on it and then letting the other two react, I'm going to say right now that when it's your turn to read a quote, read the quote and then immediately let the other two react.
And silence.
Yeah, just drop it like a mic. Drop it like it's hot.
Drop it like it's hot.
That's right. Drop it like a bomb that will ruin your career and prospects in ministry for having shared it forever. Yeah, just drop it and then let the other two react. Let the other two put it in a category, give their quick, like instant reaction thoughts on it, and then you provide your nuance. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sounds good.
Alrighty. I am going to tap Tony first. Tony, you're going to get us started off.
All right. Well, to follow that, I'm not going to speak after the quote. I am going to give a little context that most of mine are C.S. Lewis. I'm just going to say I'm a big fan of C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, fair enough.
Honestly, I'm an even bigger fan of Tolkien. A little fun fact here is that Tolkien, for people who know, they like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were actually buddies, in a bunch of different layers when it comes to their writing and their friendship and everything else. But historically, Tolkien was the one who actually led C.S. Lewis to Christianity. For some reason, like originally, I always assumed it was the other way around. But anywho. With that being said, my first C.S. Lewis quote, I willingly believe that the damned are, in one sense, successful, rebels to the end, that the doors of hell are locked on the inside. So nice and easy, short one.
Michael, you want first up? I can't wait to tear into this guy, personally. But if you want Adam first, you can have it.
I'll let you go first on this one.
Okay. I
can repeat it if necessary.
Yeah. The doors of hell are locked on the inside. And Lewis clarifies that all who are in hell were successful in their attempt effectively to get there.
That's right. They're rebellion.
Yeah. I certainly have to find that compelling. And so for me, immediately, I have to put it in that second category. I don't immediately find that yikes completely. I don't immediately find that like, no, that's something that we all need to base ourselves in. I find it compelling. There are parts of that I have to wrestle with. The idea that just anybody that would like to get out can just walk out at any time. There feels like there would be some logistical issue. But at the same time, it resonates with some things that I see about the words of Jesus and the description of reality. And even that biblical picture of hell being a present reality on earth that people willingly unleash by defining right and wrong in their own eyes and using their God-given ability as an image bearer to bear an image other than God. That being something that unleashes hell. So that's very compelling to me. When people do terrible, terrible things that destroy their lives and other people's lives, it's not because they were forced to. It's usually because they wanted to. And so it does make sense to me that that people could be free to destroy their own lives and even the lives of others after life, in a sense. But there's logistical issues there. So I find it compelling. That's what I'll say for now.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Michael?
Yeah, I think I would say the same thing. I'd put that in that second category, where there's definitely compelling elements to it, And as well as like, yeah, I think additionally there are parts of that that are probably commonly true. But I think for some of the same reasons as Nate, I don't necessarily know if I would say it's the full, like nuanced sort of picture that I would want to say is like a grounding
Yeah. Yeah.
type of phrasing, which is of course really hard to do when it like it's like a sentence or two from a guy. You're not going to really sum it up very easily that way. But I think the primary part that would keep me from feeling like it's grounding is that sort of sense of like it's locked from the inside. That part of the quote. To a degree, I like that and agree with it, but I think there's also, part of the biblical story that presents humanity as deceived as well,
Mm. Yeah.
and very much what's another word to put it, enslaved in other words as well, like how Paul sometimes talks about it. And so the door being locked from the inside, I think there might also be a bouncer at the door as well to a certain extent, and
Yeah.
you need a little
Yeah.
bit of help to bust out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that's all I would add to
bounce,
that. Yeah.
a bouncer that may not push you around, but might gaslight you right back
Yeah.
the other way around. Yeah,
Yeah, no,
interesting.
that totally makes sense. I definitely track with that. I would say that historically, when the conversation of hell has come up, whenever it's amongst friends, or I even remember some mission trips back in the day. I had a really awesome experience in Houston, actually working with a bunch of Nepali refugees for a good number of months, living with them actually. And for those who don't know, I actually live in Houston, so it's not like it's a super far trip, but trying to explain that concept, Michael, what you're talking about, like how there has to be some kind of bouncer going on, right? Because the way I try to get it across to a culture that is very family dependent, it's that God has a family and Jesus has a family, and make no mistake about it, he wants everyone in his family. He That's truly his desire. Um, but the thing is about family is that if you get to make the choice of bringing someone into your family, but then like because you know this person, you know their heart, you know exactly how they're tuned, or their decisions, or their behavior that they've had, that they hate your sister, and you want to marry this person or bring them into your family, but they absolutely abhor your sister. They can't be in the same room as your sister. Like, they will cause some kind of harm or violence, whenever it's verbal or physical, to someone who is already in your family. It's like, at that point, it doesn't matter how much you want the best for that individual, and it doesn't matter how much you want them in your family. The question then becomes, would it be wise and loving for me to let that person who has the harmful intent into that close knit family of mine, when I know the consequences and the destruction that would take place? I don't mean to get off on a tangent, but that's what I felt with this C.S. Lewis quote as well. I do think that there is a lot of compelling evidence, like you said, Nate, when it comes, or a compelling thought, thinking about rebels to the end and how God let them be successful with what they wanted. And so with that being said, I could easily string this to a second quote as well, if you don't mind me keeping this moving forward here, Nate.
Yeah, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and yeah, I have more to say, but I'm gonna try to stay quiet again. The second quote is similar, still C.S. Lewis, still sourced from The Great Divorce, to be honest with you. He says, "There are only two kinds of people in the end: those who say to God, 'Thy will be done,' and then those to whom God says, 'In the end, thy will be done.' All that are in hell choose it."
I I actually like that quote better than the first one.
Hmm.
I do. I immediately I have to put it in compelling again, I think I put the entire book of The Great Divorce in compelling for me.
Makes sense.
And I don't think C.S. Lewis ever meant it to be like, I'm proposing a new view that should be the orthodox view. I mentioned this in past episodes. I think he was like pondering and imagining what things could be like. But I also think he recognized that there isn't enough detail in the Bible for us to get a detailed, fleshed out view of the ins and the outs and the system. So all that said, I find it very compelling. I think that's deeply resonant with the entire message of Scripture, which is like that's the fundamental Genesis 1, 2, but really it's the Genesis 3 like tension, where our Adam and Eve are human beings going to be human beings that partner with Yahweh and say, we'll trust you, or will they define right and wrong in their own eyes? And then it's the Genesis 4 tension, where sin is crouching at the door, but you must rule it. So trust my vision of right, God says, as opposed to your own. And then it's the Genesis 6 tension. It's the Genesis 12 tension, and so on and so forth. I think it's a tension of human history, is the whose will be done, right? So I find that very compelling. I think one of the logistical things that it misses out a little bit on, possibly, is the sense of like God will not allow hell to defile his new creation. I believe that. I believe that's a very strong picture from Revelation of like, when these things happen, there's going to be a reckoning and a sense in which God is going to like fully and finally cast out everything that is hell from his new heaven and new earth. So that sense of locked from the inside and all who are in hell choose to be there. I think there's something very, very true about that. But Michael, I think you said it well a moment ago when you said like that probably isn't a good way of describing the complete picture, if we could even describe if we even have the ability to describe the complete picture. It probably isn't that, but I find it deeply compelling.
Makes sense. Michael?
Yeah, I think I would say again, largely the same stuff as Nate. I'd put it in compelling, but like halfway over into grounding. And my reason for that is that I think it's vague enough that you can keep asking questions of it, and it's like the quote itself sort of shrugs at you a little bit. Like at the end, well, what do you mean? And it's like, I don't know. what do you think?
Yeah.
And
Oh man, that's so true. That's exactly why I like it more than the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so because of that wiggle room there, I'm actually like, oh, that lets you continue to sort of wrestle with it and ask more questions of it, which I personally, I just enjoy that sort of situation in my, just generally in quotes. But yeah, with that, I think by and large, the who puts you in hell discussion is also, when you're talking about hell, a really important element of the overall discussion.
Yeah.
And so having this quote in a very interesting way make clear how you get there, I think is both fascinating. It puts the issue into a very interesting perspective that I find worth chewing on.
Yeah, and again, to piggyback what you're saying there, Michael, the worth chewing on it bit. Like, if this is your first episode with us, just like Nate said earlier, what are you doing? Please go back and at least listen to one or two of the previous hell ones. But in the most recent episode we just had on the hell, we broke down a little bit on not only the different historical terms, and historical context of the word hell used in the Bible, but we also did different theological views, right? And a big theme of our podcast, surprise, surprise, is challenging people to actually chew on maybe a piece of meat or a piece of gristle, or maybe you consider it to be fat that should just be spit out. But the whole goal is to actually engage. The goal is to not be so stubborn in our defense of the truth that we can't allow the truth to defend itself. I don't know if that makes sense exactly, but that's kind of the perspective that I have. That if you're not willing to engage on something that you aren't 100% sure on, that might run counter to what you already thought, then you're, in my opinion, you're not having a conversation. You know, you're not taking efforts to grow and stretch yourself. Maybe you were right to begin with, or maybe there's some nuance there. And so I think this quote for me, you know, it does that. It does that, what you were talking about, Nate. It challenges me. I think it's a very challenging quote, or it can be considered very challenging to the particular view that we discussed of eternal conscience torment, that theological perspective on hell, where basically hell is a prison and God puts people there and they're going to be tortured as the consequences of their sin, for all of eternity, regardless of what the specific crime is. The crime is the selfishness of the heart, the sin in and of itself. So the reason why I think it challenges that is, you know, it makes you think that, is there some nuance here where God didn't just arbitrarily imprison people against their will, but instead, you know, maybe hell could be a natural consequence of a lifetime of choices that run against creation and run against what is actually helpful and sustainable, um, and not destructive or selfish, that hurts you and hurts people around you. So that's why I like that quote. It really does challenge me and ask me, you know, is hell that typical thing of what Nate, you know, our first episode of fire and brimstone and devil poking you with a pitchfork? You know, we already know that to not be true, or at least that's, you know, what we're trying to claim with that episode. Please listen to that one. But yeah, so just engaging it, I do find this one to be this quote to be very engaging.
Yeah, there was one that I wrote down that I'm not going to share it as one of the like main quotes. I'll just kind of tack it onto what you were just saying just a moment ago with the C.S. Lewis quotes.
Gotcha. Yeah.
This one was from Tim Mackey, who is famous for his work in the Bible Project. So those videos talking about different books of the Bible or different themes from the Bible on YouTube. I respect his work a lot, but he said that hell is what happens when God gives humans what they want, and when what they want isn't God.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
think it's very similar. It's a very similar sentiment as what Lewis was expressing with this idea of that there is as God has created the world and given humans agency, there's this sense in which our freedom to freely choose love gives us equal freedom to freely choose the opposite of love. And our freedom to freely choose
That's
God
right.
gives us equal freedom to choose the opposite of God, and to define right and wrong in our own eyes, and define it in our own image and whatever else. And so whenever we do what we want, if what God wants for us is our flourishing and our greatest good always, then us doing the opposite of what God wants inevitably leads to the opposite of our flourishing and the opposite of our good and the good of others. So yes, I'm not going to use that as a quote that I'm going to share, just because those are very
Yeah,
parallel.
it's tied together.
That's
Absolutely.
right. Okay, Michael, I'm going to tap you for the next quote share here.
Alrighty. I have a couple here. I'm gonna choose some of the shortest ones. I had a couple here that are a bit longer, and I'm like, actually, as I look at these might be a little bit rough in podcast form to
Sure.
to follow half a page of something from Saint Jerome. Um, so let's see. I'll go with this one. For it is needful that evil should some day be wholly and absolutely removed out of the circle of being.
You read that again?
It is needful that evil should someday, and he says holy, not as in like, holy,
Mhm,
but as in
mhm.
like completely, and absolutely removed out of the circle of being.
Who said this?
This is Gregory of Nyssa
Nice. Oh,
from
Greg.
the 300s. Yep.
Yeah.
Saint Greg.
Based Greg.
Yeah. So initially, I do want to put that into the third category, right? Of foundational, because if you just think about life in general, everyone can point to something where that we've all had the tears, we've all had the hurricanes, we've all had the dragons in our lives. In what else is there besides the hope that one day those things at every tear will be wiped away. um and so I think that it is based, right? um there is like a slight nuance that I would put forth if I was playing a little bit of the devil's advocate here, especially if we're talking about hell, and once more talking about the eternal conscious torment view of hell, that literally is hell is going to exist for all of eternity. And so it that quote in and of itself saying that it should be completely eliminated from creation, from existence, right? It's like, well, it's not necessarily eliminated. Maybe it's just too nitpicking, cherry picking. I don't know. It's not necessarily eliminated from creation as a whole. It's just eternally separated from others, right? And so I don't know if that would open that door or not. But regardless, if you're focusing on the beautiful side of that idea that every tear will be wiped away and every right or every wrong will be made right,
Yep.
I think is very critical to anyone who's Christian or not.
Yes, yes. I will also put it in grounding. However, I think the way it's worded
Mm,
is compelling.
yeah.
I think
Yeah.
the meaning is grounding and very, very important. But the phrasing is very compelling because it leaves it very open. And off the top of my head,
Yeah.
I don't remember the full context of what his point is. But
Yeah.
there's a variety of ways that you remove evil wholly from the circle of being, conceivably,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
What's the how there?
Right.
exactly.
Yes. So the arc of my life, and I realize some listeners are followers of Jesus, and some are not, or just interested, or just familiar, or whatever else. But I am a follower of Jesus. The arc of my life can be described as evil being removed from the circle of my being.
Mm,
Mhm.
That has been the arc of the last like 15 years of my life as a Jesus follower. Progressively, day by day, year by year, evil and hell is being removed from my being. Like I'm becoming a person that is less that less is driven by the need to get what I want, and is less compulsive and less
mhm.
selfish and less impatient, and more somebody that is trusting God's vision of what is good and true, and more somebody that is loving, and so on and so forth. I hope I continue that arc, right? So,
Yeah.
but I'm alive. I'm not dead, right? So you could say in one way that can be a living thing. And then you if you apply that to afterlife, then you get into all kinds of like weeds, right?
Yeah.
You have all kinds of a bad time trying to figure out how that works. I think that is why C.S. Lewis, that exact rubbing point, is one of the major reasons why C.S. Lewis wrote The Great Divorce, in my opinion.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, you can interpret it like a God refuses to let hell ruin his good creation. That was the line that I gave
Yeah.
earlier. That's a very Revelation picture, where eventually you say, eventually God says, enough, and I'm not going to let this go on. There is that picture throughout the entirety of Scripture, the idea of the day of the Lord, and God acting in history to put a stop to things. Now, within that biblical picture, when God acts to do that, it is almost always, and I would theoretically argue always, possibly, a picture of God allowing evil to collapse in upon itself.
Mm-hmm.
When you see the flood, what you're seeing is God releasing creation to its chaos, but basically allowing creation to return to chaos from order. When you see consistently like the acts of Abraham or the acts of Jacob, and their moments when they act selfishly and stupidly, there's like this many moments of decreation that happen where God releases these people to experience the consequences of their own evil. Now, those aren't any kind of final deconstruct or decreation. There's always a recreation with Abraham and Jacob and so on and so forth. Even with creation and the flood, there's a recreation narrative. But I would wonder, is that moment where God steps into history, like exactly what would that look like? It's very clear from a biblical perspective that God will put a stop to evil, that evil will be wholly removed from the circle of being, right? But the way that will look is really, that's the part that's compelling to me. So I think it's fundamentally true that it is completely necessary that evil is removed completely from the circle of being. But how? I think that's the wrestling point for so many.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I don't know if I want to go down this path completely or not, but when you're talking about the whole rub of what happens after we die, if we are pointed in a direction right now where we are learning and growing and slowly but surely getting the hell out of our decisions, out of our behavior, out of the way we treat others and treat ourselves. It's like, does that process end when our mortal bodies come to an end? I think there is a lot of compelling ideas there, because if you think about heaven, right, and you think about what we've talked about of God's goal of bringing Eden back to earth, and it's not a destination issue, it's a internal heart growth. It's like, how much more can we and could we grow if we're pointing in eternity, right? If we have all of time to keep going in this direction that we're in. But like you said, that's very up in the air. Who knows the specifics? We shouldn't get obsessed with it, but here we are talking about it.
Well, Michael, that was your quote. What do you think about it?
Oh, I mean, I adore it. I really like a lot of what good old Greg has to offer in a lot of cases. And I would agree with what you guys are saying. Part of why I like it is that at least this particular quote, again, has enough in there that's sort of vague, that you can chew on something of it that is, I think, very much true. Evil will one day be absolutely removed. And then you're left with the questions of, well, what will that look like? Well, brother, that's going to be the exciting discovery of the one day when it happens. And from what I've read from some of Gregory's other stuff, he is a guy who I think a lot of people kind of put him in a camp that's considered like a, you would almost call it like, I think it's called universal reconciliation, is some of his other kind of things he was preaching during his time, which is he believed that something like hell will eventually have its own end, because evil is just a parasite on good. How is it going to survive without parasiting?
That's very controversial.
Yeah, very much so. But you can see that these church fathers at this time were very much kind of wrestling with that idea of if how can evil or whatever else exist apart from God's presence? How can anything exist apart from his presence? And then they're also wrestling with the difference between good and love is eternal, but evil is not. So why should it last forever then? And so it's a very fascinating line of thinking from a lot of these church fathers. And I wish more people had at least heard of these for the sake of chewing, because it's fascinating. Definitely not the popular view of today, but I think worth talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of the idea that the potential of evil could potentially always exist.
Yeah,
And it's like it's not that it could. Once more, I keep going back to C.S. Lewis, right?
yeah,
Aslan the lion. It's is he safe? No, he's not safe. Are you kidding me? He's a lion. He's God. He's capable of everything. But is he good? And so it's that idea that, yeah, the potential was potentially there with God, even, but he will never make that choice. I think that is very fascinating and very engaging because it's like, what do you mean? It could be very heretical to say, what do you mean
yeah,
God could possibly sin? Are you kidding me? Or God can
yeah.
be evil, but he chooses not to. Like,
Mm,
I think that's a very strong point or interesting idea to wrestle with.
yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, my turn. I'm gonna give you guys a quote, and I'm looking for really quick reactions.
Okay.
So here we go. This is from Jonathan Edwards from a particular sermon that Michael alluded to an episode ago. Here we go. The God that holds you over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire, abhors you and is dreadfully provoked. He looks upon you as worthy of nothing else but to be cast into the fire. And that is from his famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of
Yeah,
an Angry God.
Yikes.
yeah. I put that in yikes for sure.
Right? Like, to elaborate on that, for me personally, I mean, I think that there are a lot of Christians, whenever they actively believe in this or not. I don't think that's the point of this, but a lot of Christians to society can come off with this. They can look this way to the rest of society, where it's like it doesn't matter that you're a good person. It doesn't matter a quote unquote good person. It doesn't matter that you're religious. It doesn't matter that you do all these things. If you're not a Christian, then a righteous God is going to strike you down because none of us from the very, very beginning are worth even looking in his presence. And so, is there elements of truth there? I won't deny that, but I think that there's a lot of nuance here that gets lost, and then all of a sudden, it's no longer what you're trying to accomplish as a Christian, trying to get people to see your point of view, and instead it devolves into just a mess. Arguments or people shutting down or not even engaging with you to begin with, which once more, this podcast is all about engaging with people. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not listening to this. So yeah, it's definitely a yikes. I can see how a lot of Christians traditionally come from that camp. And I can see that camp being productive in a lot of different ways, especially from their own perspective. But I personally think that the church as a whole needs to steer away from the implied hatred there that God has, or the implied disdain that God has for humanity, right? That and more towards an understanding of how God truly views us. And yes, he has a hatred and a disdain for sin and selfishness, but I would argue the reason why he hates sin and selfishness is because of what it does to us, the people that he loves, the people that he wants the best for. He sees the consequences of our stupid choices, and that grieves him.
Yeah, man. I yeah, it's a yikes for me, bro. And it's
It's a
I
no
know,
for me, dog.
yeah, it's a no for me, dog.
That's a big no for me.
I mean, I recognize this because I got little pieces of that all growing up, and also I come from a background that has a theology kind of that was built in that really let that general idea really kind of run rampant. Uh, so certain like strains of Lutherans will make it a big point to talk about how we're dirty rags, um, uh, lower than worms type of stuff. You were sinful from before sperm even met egg, you know,
Yeah.
and so therefore, what you are is a sinful thing, and therefore God absolutely does disdain and abhors you. That line of thinking is a very scary one. If you were hoping to have a good relationship with God, that's not a good place to start. In my experience, it's just a scary place to be. And in a in many ways, then what is kind of described as what that theology says Jesus did is basically put a paper bag over your head with a Jesus face plastered on it and just said
Yeah,
like
yeah.
God hates you, but he loves Jesus. And
That's
so
right. He doesn't see you. He
yeah,
sees
he
Jesus.
sees Jesus. You're covered in the
Yeah.
blood in that way. Um, and so therefore then he doesn't like it's I don't know, man. It's a really rough one to grow up in. Uh, and ultimately it makes God's love a technicality. Um, he he loves you by way of happenstance because Jesus managed to, I don't know, he's tricking him or something.
Mhm.
Um, or he worked the system. And so there, but yeah, this quote really presents God almost like a sadistic kid with a bug that's going to burn it up with a magnifying glass, in my
Why
opinion.
he even gets the insect image
Yeah.
in
Yeah,
the line.
yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he's holding that spider over the edge, which
Yeah.
you can keep going with it. Like, why not also pull the legs off that spider, or whatever? Like
Yeah.
it's a disgusting thing worthy of it.
Yeah.
And so I think all of the discussion about hell, and why there's even conceived of such a place and what it's supposed to do in that quote makes it sound like it's because God is both vengeful and just full of disgust for us,
Mm.
and is looking for the opportunity to fry us. And so that's a rough. I've always had a rough time with that particular quote.
Yeah, and I really like what you said there, talking about, growing up in that environment and growing up in seeing that firsthand, how people perpetuate that kind of view. And Nate, you even talked about it kind of with the whole Hell House ideas, and once more the fear of punishment, the fear of going to this terrible place because it's what we rightfully deserve. If like the fact that God has even thought about giving us a chance to begin with is well more than what we deserve, right? But I'd also want to say, make no mistake about it. There there is a to be careful about not swinging to the other extreme here, right? That people listening to this can easily go, well, if you minimize the severity of our sin and the severity of how much God has a wrath towards sin and towards humans in their sinful nature, then it's very easy to grow up in a very watered down gospel culture, right? There's a lot of megachurches that are accused of this, that the reason why they bring in large numbers of people because they make God very palatable. They make him an easy to swallow pill. And all of a sudden, there's this prosperity gospel that's being preached. but this understanding that no, like we are sinners in the hands of an angry God completely gets abandoned to the other extreme, which I would argue there's a lot of negative consequences that can come from that
Yeah. Yeah.
perspective, and
For
being
me,
raised in
obviously,
that
no
perspective as well.
surprises here. It's in the yikes category for me. Um, and I think what's crazy about the spider or insect metaphor is that Jesus actually gave us metaphors for how God views people who are far from him. And he said this is like the Luke 15, right? He said like
Yeah.
we're a lost sheep, or we're a valuable coin, or in the parable of the prodigal son, like the son that squandered everything, but the father still sits and waits and rejoices when they come home. It's like a spider. Yeah, you step on a spider, but you throw a party when your son returns home, right? So this little picture of like God barely standing to be able to look at us. Paul in Romans 5 paints this picture of how God demonstrated his love for us in that while we were still sinners, like while yet continuing in that thing, that God does abhor that lifestyle and the consequences of sin, the effects of sin. While we were still sinners, Christ gave his life up for us. Or in 2 Corinthians 5, it's God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. So there isn't a picture of revulsion there. It's a picture of self-sacrificial love. And even there's another place in Ezekiel. I think it's just a few chapters before, like the dry bones chapter that's really famous in Ezekiel, in like the early 30s, where God says to Ezekiel, I want you to say to all of them, like I'm the Lord. I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked. I rather that they turn from their ways and live. So like Edwards gives this picture, like the picture there is like God is like itching to drop the spider, and like only holding back on a technicality almost. But Ezekiel has an explicit statement that God takes no pleasure in punishment or death or whatever. His entire posture there, in God's own words, is pleading for human flourishing. So turn and live, right? So yeah, I don't like that quote.
Yeah, it's definitely a yikes.
Yeah. I was just gonna add to the list there of verses. This one makes me think of John 3:16. Like it's the quintessential Christian verse that everyone knows, but it's the God so loved the world that he gave his only son.
Jesus
Not
so
that he was
loved
so
the world
disgusted
that he
by
was
it,
willing to stand
but
in
he
our
loved
place, and receive the Father's wrath. Like that's definitely not. That's an anti-biblical picture, for sure. Yeah, I mean, well, believe it or not, fellas, we're at the 50-minute mark. Time has absolutely flown.
I noticed that.
And as much as I've enjoyed this, we can't share another round of one quote each, or we'll have no time left at all. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm going to ask each of you for some final thoughts. There is a world where we all talk about this and we're like, we really want to do another one for some reason, but this really could be the last episode on hell, at least for a while. So I'd like to ask both of you for your final thoughts, and then I'd like to, as we wrap up, provide some landing gear, if that makes sense. And for both of you, if you could keep it to around like 2.5 minutes. Think like that around length, because we're at 50 minutes and we try to wrap up by around 60. So, Tony, you want to start us off?
Yeah, for me, to sum up the conversation of hell, I think that the theological discussions or arguments, they can all be very engaging, and I think that there is some level of purpose to them. Like it's not arbitrary to try to identify if hell is about people being eliminated from all eternity, or if they're going to be tortured for all of eternity. I think that it's a healthy conversation to have. But at the end of the day, I'm more concerned about Christianity being viewed as a location problem, as a how do we get to heaven and how do we avoid hell? That not only do Christians themselves completely miss the boat of what the kingdom of God was meant to be, not this external kingdom on in the clouds or even on the earth per se, that conquers the Romans, that conquers the Nazis, that conquers the Americans, right? But instead, that there truly is a development of behavior. There truly is God's heart um, that wants the best for creation logically and intellectually. That going on as a Christian is far, far more important than let me make sure that I check the boxes off to avoid hell, right? And I get it. A lot of Christians, their motivation for saving other people, for evangelism, for making it very clear that I'm right and you're wrong is because hell is a part of that conversation. And I would just encourage you to take a step back from that approach, because not only if that has been the only way that you've seen hell and heaven, that this is what Christianity is all about, is getting out of hell and getting into heaven. That has a huge impact on the rest of society, on how they view Christians, on how they view like just the concept that, oh, so Christians are so self-righteous that you think everyone else is going to go to hell and burn alive for all of eternity just because they don't think the same way that you do. Um, and that's an engaging topic, one that as a Christian, I do not feel like we have done justice to, that we should engage in more. And I feel like the reason why we haven't engaged in it more is because we do get maybe a little too wrapped up in the theological side of things, which has merit, and we lose track of, hey, Christianity is a lot more about the internal of our heart and our behavior and the decisions that we make and how we actually view our neighbor and how we actually view our enemy, and these other radical things that Jesus really did change the earth when he stepped foot on it. That if we don't have that perspective of Christianity, it's very easy to look at hell and have a negative impact when we're trying to help
Yeah.
other people
Well put.
avoid hell,
Michael?
quote unquote.
Man, it's hard to wrap it all up, everything we've talked about. I think my hope is that after these episodes, people have maybe come across different ways of hearing about this, thinking about this, have maybe more questions than they've ever had in terms of what this might look like, or whatever the case might be. I think we've mentioned it a few times that the Bible really doesn't give us a whole lot of information on afterlife, heaven and hell, and what exactly that looks like, and so on and so forth. And when it does give us the information, it's largely in parable or some other kind of symbolic speak. And so there's actually so much shrugging that we're kind of left with in certain ways in terms of the specifics. But I think people have gotten so caught up in trying to make specifics then, based on, in some cases, their view of, I don't know, their personal view of God. And you can end up with a God who wants to toast you like a spider, or any other number of things. But I don't know. I guess I don't know exactly where I'm going with that, other than I hope it's more food for thought, and I hope it spurs maybe more understanding in terms of where people are coming from when they're talking about these sorts of things. Yeah, I think that's largely what I always hope happens, is just that people continue to search for more understanding, keep asking questions.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks, guys. So, like I said, I'd like to provide some what I refer to as landing gear here. If you're listening to this and going like cool story, fellas, but what do I do with any of that stuff? I wanted to provide, just for those of you listening, like I would like to be able to grab onto that. This is what I'd like to provide for you. So obviously, the last 3 episodes, we've thrown a lot of heavy quotes and history and ideas at you all. But I think the worst thing to do would be to let a bunch of information flow into your head to just be crammed in there. The fundamental step with all learning is to bring it down to earth, as it were. So I wanted to give you guys a very short practice, something you could do, and a couple reflection questions to ask yourself, and then what I'll call a liturgy or a guided prayer at the end of this for those of you that like to walk through it. For the practice, what I'd like to challenge you, for those interested, is this. To this week, identify a specific area in your life that currently feels a little bit like hell. And maybe it's a fractured relationship. Maybe it's in the way you're responding to an environment or the environment itself at your job. Or maybe it's something in your own head, like a spiral of anxiety. Yeah, your practice is to intentionally introduce a little piece of heaven into that exact space this week. And that could look like a lot of things. Maybe it's a forgiving text. Maybe it's a refusal to participate in office gossip. Maybe it's taking 5 minutes just to sit in God's grace. But the practice is this: don't wait for heaven. Start bringing it. For reflection, I'd like, for those of you interested, I'd like you to take some time just this week, even right now after this episode if you want, to sit with a couple questions, maybe in a journal or even around a dinner table. The first one's this: if I completely remove the fear of hell from my theology, what would my primary motivation for following Jesus actually be? And the second one is, does my personal view of the afterlife make God look like the father of the prodigal son, or like a warden looking for a reason to lock the door? Those are 2 questions that I think are very worthwhile to sit with the next time you have some time to journal, or even time to have a conversation over a table. And lastly, for those interested, here's a short liturgy, a short guided prayer. So take a breath if you want, and let's pray. God of this present moment, would you forgive us for the times that we've used fear to manipulate, and for the times that we've let fear distort your face? Would you deliver us from the obsession of escaping this world? And would you ground our feet in the holy, the set-apart work of healing it? God, where there's isolation in your creation, would you help us to bring connection? God, where there's condemnation in your creation, would you help us to bring your grace? Would your kingdom come? Would your will be done right now, right here, as it is in heaven? Amen. So, Michael, Tony, thank you guys for being willing to spend your time and your brains and your energy on the last handful of episodes. Now, this has been a challenging topic for sure. I don't know if the topic of hell will ever stop being a challenging topic,
Absolutely.
but I've found it really enjoyable and meaningful, and hopefully some of our listeners have as well. So thank you guys for being on here.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thanks
And
again
thank
for
you
having
for
me.
our listeners. Yeah, thank you, Michael.
So everybody, once again, and as always, with all of the wrestling, with all of the ins and outs and the ups and downs of faith, or wrestling with faith, or even considering wrestling with faith, just want to remind y'all to take it easy.